We'll be talking about the refineries in Nigeria. So oil refineries play a pivotal role in ensuring a nation's energy independence. The processing of the crude oil into various refined products such as the gasoline, the diesel and jet fuel can reduce Nigeria's reliance on external energy sources. However, in spite of the country's abundant oil reserve, Nigeria is still struggling to meet daily oil consumption. As part of the efforts by the government to make the private sector take more active roles in refining of petroleum, 60 licenses were granted for the establishment of private refineries. 18 years after the licenses were granted, only about 2 private refineries, Walter Smith Refining and Petrochemical Refining Ibigwe in Imo State, and Dangote Refinery, the Africa's biggest oil company situated at the Lekki Free Zone in Lagos, have made concerted efforts to commence the production. Now, these are some of the issues that we'll be talking about in order to get the main insight of what is happening in the petroleum sector. So right now we have with us Mr. Olabode Sowumi. He is an energy analyst, also the co-owner of an energy consultancy called the Cabtree Limited, and the publisher of Energia Today magazine. Thank you so much. And also, he is a member of the African Business Roundtable. So it's good to have you in our own table this morning.
Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. All right, so let's start by what happened, I think, last week, where the committee in the Senate committee, called the GCO, Melekari GCEO, to talk about what is happening in the petroleum industry. And what he said that actually got Nigerians a bit skeptical is the fact that everyone is happy that Dangote Refineries is actually making a surge ahead, and there's that notion that immediately the refinery starts operating, the fuel price will reduce. But then he came out to say that it doesn't really mean that the fuel price is going to reduce. How did we get here?
Okay, I think first of all, about almost 2 years ago now, I was here on your stage show. I think it was the business segment, and we made this analysis. And one of the things I said then is precisely this: the fact that the cost of fuel is not necessarily complicated. And if we just pay a little more attention, we can look at the items that make up the complex chain. So even for the ones that we import, how do we get at the cost? So there's a cost to crude oil, obviously. It's an international price. There's a cost to transportation. It is international. There's a cost to refining. It's an international cost. Then you transport it back, and then the last mile, which is basically your tanker drivers. If you just pay a little more attention to all those costs, you will have an idea of what the cost will be. Now, if we are to refine locally, there are a lot of attendant benefits, which we can come to later, but we will eliminate just 2 main costs, which is transportation to the refinery overseas and transportation back. And it's not a lot of cost in terms of the total picture. So if you look at it, just spend some more attention, you see that it may not necessarily be so. But what we have now is something that is a little bit more complicated. And why is that? Because Dangote Refinery got their crude from Agbami, which is a well that is owned by Chevron, FAMFA, that's the Alakija lady, as well as Equinor, which has also sold their shares, which is an oil company based out of Norway. Now, what has happened is that they didn't go into a trading deal directly with those operators. Those people sold it to Shell, the trading arm, Shell Trading, and then Dangote bought it from Shell Trading. What that means basically, if you buy something to resell, there has to be something on it, so there's a premium. So what the crude that Dangote is getting today is international price plus a premium, because they are buying it from like a third party. Okay. Now, and I've made this argument that, for we that do the analysis and all of these things, our purpose is not to form an opinion or to give people a view. We are supposed to analyze the facts as they are, and then people can form their own opinion. Those are the fundamentals. Now, for me, if there was ever a time that Dangote required a waiver, it probably is this one, because this is where his work and the activities that he's doing affects the macroeconomic circumstances of Nigeria. So the waiver is not because of his business, it is just because of the economics, so that things can go down and then other factors can come into it. But that is not my own decision to make, but that's just to allow people to see the circumstances and the facts of the matter. The second, which is probably very critical aspect of it, is the long-term benefits, because we always tend to think of the short-term, the immediate things, but we work in a system, and a system will function where the component parts work. So if you talk about the reproductive system. The reproductive system does not just depend on food alone. It does not just depend on taking certain antibiotics and all that. It is a system. There are very many parts that needs to work together for it to function. So the system that we work in, which is the system that is producing, which is the downstream sector, is going to produce jobs on the long term and affect the economy. So basically, the places where they are refining, they're going to eat the people that work there. So that is an industry that is going to well up there, people that are going to trade there. Some people are going to provide cleaning services, janitorial services. And as people start to live in those areas, there's going to be real estate. Schools are going to come in. So you're looking at multiplier effects for all those things. For some people's whole lifeline and life businesses is going to be dependent on that. For those who may be a bit older, who are familiar, because I grew up partially in Kaduna, and we used to have one of the biggest refineries in Kaduna. For many years, there were people whose sole businesses were related to the refinery. There were people who, for over a decade, all they were doing, or their lifeline, was supplying food to the refineries. When the refineries shut down, the businesses also shut down. Those are some of the things that people didn't know in terms of multiplier effects in the economy. There was another thing that was known with KD in those days, which was the textile factory. And we had so many people. In fact, Adams Oshiomhole rose on the backbone of his labor as a representative of the textile mills. So one of the things that we actually will find out is that all these industries, particularly this one, is going to create sub-industries and sub-economies that is going to affect everyone. So on the long term, there are benefits, but on the short term, it may not be as quickly as we want to see. And the only basis where there will be such quick interventions is when there is also another government intervention. And that is not necessarily the posture and the positioning that government
the plans of this. Yes, indeed, it's looking that way. Because one thing that, we all know is that Nigerians are already struggling with what is going on, which the main issue is the fact that we are oil producing company, but then we're still suffering from the price of petrol. So how do you think that, the emergence of this new refinery business would help Nigeria's energy, consumption and all that, how should I put it, the need of the energy the system that we want in Nigeria? Okay, so
there are certain things that are dependent on the industry. There are certain things that are dependent on our culture as a people. So when I say culture as a people, I'm not talking about tribal culture. I'm talking about corporate culture, the way we do business, the way we look at business, the way we look at government activities. And there are certain things that is related to the level of development as a people. So let's start with the first one. When you have corporate culture, let's speak with that way, there is a notion amongst us, generally, that government business is nobody's business. It may sound nice to some people. It may even affect the interest of one or two people in terms of being positive. But on the overall, it kills us. Because you see, what belongs to everybody also belongs to nobody. And when it doesn't belong to anybody, there is nobody who takes responsibility that it should function. Once it doesn't function, at the end of the day, we all suffer it. We should realize that there are significant parts of the economy that are purely government business. Government is responsible for getting taxes, FIRS. Government is responsible for policing the economy and ensuring that things work out. Government is responsible for the legal aspect. We may say those ones are different, but if there is a culture, if there is a system, an attitude of working, it is going to affect everywhere, and at the end of it all, we all suffer. And why is that relevant? It is relevant in the sense that for people to consider some kind of government intervention or some kind of government help into the economy, the first fear is corruption. The second thing is that we didn't really get to the people. The third one is that certain people are going to milk. It all has to do with our system. Some of those things need to change. And globally, Peter Drucker, who is one of the most famous management consultants, is responsible for that slogan, which says that culture defeats strategy anywhere in the world. In fact, his exact words were culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Okay, so now what you're saying is that Nigerians need to think differently in order to help the new refineries to emerge.
Yes. So when you are seeing the refinery as a system, not just the refinery as part of it, because the refinery, for it to give the effect that we desire, still needs some help. It's a private business, yes, but it still needs some help. So that's the point I'm trying to make. The other part of it is that there is the fact that every nation that is an OPEC nation, they enjoy certain subventions. Whether it's Venezuela, they smuggle, the same thing we have here, they smuggle, all the countries around it smuggle their, in UAE, it is very cheap. The reason why ours is looking cheap now is because the naira has fallen with respect to the dollar. So when they're going to compare it, they're going to compare it with the dollar, which seems to be universal. But that may not give an accurate figure, because when you start to look at what is our, minimum wage, it doesn't correlate. So it's a comparison, but it doesn't give the full picture. So those are some of the things that needs to be looked into. But at the end of the day, we have the situation where we are now. The first thing is to get the system working, to get the refineries even producing. And once the refineries start to produce, then we'll now start to look at whatever macroeconomic help that can come into it. Those things are outside the influence of the industry. That's where the CBN comes in. That's where the banks comes in. That's where all those macroeconomic figures, because it's deregulated, but really, if the naira should fall today, it's still going to affect it.
So let's round and come back to my first question initially about the fear of the fact that even though Dangote is private, let's not forget the government still own a share in the Dangote refinery. So now Nigerians are losing hope. That one hope that we're holding on to, that when the refineries start working, eventually the price is going to come down. So now the GCEO of NNPCL is saying that it's not going to be the case. So what can the government do in order to make sure that when these refineries start working, because there's been promises of others even coming along the way and promising that at the end of the year, at least the last refinery, which is the Kaduna, would also start working. So how can the government help in order to make sure that in the short run, Nigerians are able to at least afford the basic necessities, starting from the price of fuel?
Well, there are certain things the government cannot do. I mean, for example, the government cannot help somebody to raise up his child. They can put free education, they can do some of all those things, but there are certain. So it's the same thing. So we operate what is called the free market, free capital market, and all that. The refineries must work within the system of the market and grow up to develop a life of their own, and then over time, they will now become competitive. So what are our expectations? We're expecting what should be long-term on the short-term. It's like when the GSM started. It used to be 50 naira per minute. I'm not sure. And that 50 naira per minute basically translated to almost $50 at that time, which would probably be like 500 naira per minute or something like that at the moment. And many people could not afford it. But over time, as the telecoms companies themselves established themselves and got rooted in themselves, they built infrastructure, and the prices came down. Even when there were fluctuations in prices, they were still stable. So those are key things to understand. This is an infant economy in terms of that is building up now. It's an economy for the downstream. Not only is it downstream, but it is the only area of the oil and gas industry where people can actually benefit or feel that they are an oil-producing nation. If they say Nigeria is producing 2 million, 4 million barrels per day, what does that mean to the common man? But if they say that the cost of diesel has come down by 50%, that means something to the common man. So effectively, the downstream area is where it affects the common man. So we need to be realistic, and the part of reality is where is responsibility of government to educate people. It's also responsibility of maybe even the Dangote, their corporate communications area and all that, to help people to understand so that people's expectations can be managed. But more importantly, it becomes a responsibility of government through the regulators to ensure that they do big brother over the market, over the economy, and allow it to grow steadily. But it must grow on its own, because you cannot teach a child how to walk. You can help a child to walk, but you cannot really teach the child how to walk. There must be that energy, that instinctive energy within the child to actually walk, run, and do those things. So the economy, the refinery, and all those things need to grow themselves and be part of the economy. So those are just the realities.
Which is, honestly, I feel Nigerians at this point, are having a bit of a panic attack considering what is going on. So at the end of the day, the government didn't put much in place in order to help in the short run. But then we know that there is that plan of, yes, hopefully the long run would provide something better. Okay, so now let's come back to how to help this child to grow. Well, let's start from the upstream of what is happening there. You mentioned that Dangote is also getting the crude in international price. How can that, how can the government or the sector help in order to at least, we all know that when the starting of production is a bit cheaper, then it would be more affordable for the people. So how can they manage that particular upstream?
I'm not sure there's much they can do.
Interesting.
Except, and why I say that is that Dangote is a private business, even though it has a percentage on it there. The only reason they can get a cheaper price is if somebody else is bearing the cost. In other words, maybe government is giving some kind of subsidy.
Which we're back to where we didn't want
exactly. To which is, it becomes even more complicated. Why are you giving a private company this? Is it because it's Dangote? I mean, obviously because of his past and all that. So those are things that we don't want to go into. You get, government has some shares in Dangote, so they need to look at the strategic intent of those shares and see whether some of that can be converted into some kind of reduced cost for them. But there are areas where government can intervene, which is, basically as at 99, there was a policy by the Obasanjo government then to make, I think it was about 50,000 barrels per day available for domestic processing, because it is our crude. So they made it available to the refineries, and the refineries processed it, even though it was said not to be enough for local consumption. So some of those things like that can be done, but they cannot, because of Dangote that is competing with them, so that they don't drive the business aground. They cannot make everything fully free to the refineries. There has to be some kind of subvention such that the fuel, the processed liquids that comes in from the refinery can be at a cheaper rate. And then those things can be driven into the villages. And that is where culture now comes in. Even though it comes out at a cheaper rate, will it really get to the people? Will it be an opportunity for those who are doing the transportation to say, let us make a killing? We don't know when this will happen again, because that's a culture, that's an attitude. Because if they do it, if they have support from the military, if they have support from the police, if they have support from customs and those who should monitor, we will see the figures going out to the people. We just will not see the benefit to the people. So that's where culture comes in as a part of helping the whole system to work.
All right, let's talk about the challenges now that these new refineries could face in future, and how they can, try to find a way to navigate outside that challenge. What are the challenges expected to be a gridlock, for these people when they're starting?
Well, they face challenges of any business that is starting. So it's a startup. So they're going to have to develop an organizational culture. So in other words, they're going to say, this is the way we work. Are we going to be very officials? Are we going to interact with the public? What's our relationship with the local community? It's an oil and gas firm at the end of the day. and they have issues with local. So what's going to be their relationship with the local community? So there are a whole range of issues along that line that they will have to deal with. But the second one, which is the one that is the elephant in the room, is the fact that are they going to be able to produce enough for them to pay their debt? Many we seem not to forget that they borrowed money, and they borrowed it in US dollars. Obviously, they have to pay the money back in US dollars. You don't need too much intelligence to know that the rate at which the US dollar was 5-10 years ago is not the same thing that it is now, but it's still the same US dollar. So are they going to have to sell everything they have in local currency for them to be able to buy? Will they at some point in time want to sell internationally for them to be able to do it? So those are factors that they need to see, because those are private concerns. Yes, we want a cheap fuel that will be cheaper than what is currently existing. But guess what? Nobody cares about the business of Dangote per se. You understand? If you like make a loss, if you like make a profit, what we just want is fuel. So it is the person that is running the company who has to put his ducks in a row, put his head down, and see how he needs to balance. So those are also challenges that they will need to face. I think in between that, but those are not unusual challenges. Those are not impossible challenges. Those are entrepreneurial challenges. That's why it's not everybody that can be an entrepreneur.
So there's this fear among other major stakeholders and also policy analysts in Nigeria, where they have this fear that based on the cost, I mean, Dangote, first of all, is a business owner. So based on him trying to recover his money, there might be that need, which you mentioned, that he might want to sell internationally, which already we all know that even when he produce enough, refine it enough, it will still not be enough for Nigeria's consumption. So there is that fear of that. But is there any possibility or probability of the fuel price increasing, even with us having refineries in the country?
The only basis at the moment for which the fuel price will increase is if there's a falling of the naira with respect to the dollar. So what that means technically is that even if the cost is the same in terms of the cost for a dollar, it is largely going to increase because the dollar to the naira has fallen. So I'll give you an example. One of the places you see this effect most is in the aviation business. I mean, if I remember, as at 2005, it cost about $1,000 effectively to fly from here to anywhere in Europe. 1,000 plus or minus, whether you're going to Paris, Stockholm, London, whatever. Now is about a 1.5 million, 1.2 million and all that. But guess what? It's still about $1,000. So the difference to us may be huge, but in terms of international pricing, it's still the same. So it is the same thing. And these are typical factors that affect businesses that are international. So if you are going to buy yams, it may not affect it that way because it's not necessarily international. But if you're exporting yams, it's a different ball game. So any business that has international bearing and international impact, the first concern is about that affects the pricing is about the dollar to the naira ratio, and that is outside the influence of Dangote or anybody in the industry.
All right, let's talk about the promises of the NNPCL saying the last refinery would start working by 2024. I mean, earlier, while the president made his inaugural speech, already immediately after the ripple effect from that speech, there was already promises that something will start happening by the end of this year, and December is running out. So is there hope that could happen, that the NNPCL and the government can deliver at the end of 2024?
Okay, if we take them to their word, there's hope. But if we don't,
as an energy analyst,
okay, so this is what I can say. We can only speak to facts and figures that is available. Except one has a direct evidence of the state of the refineries, we cannot actually pass judgment. And that is where journalism comes in, because sometimes you can actually get the NNPC spokesperson to tell us the state. And it is from the questions you ask them, because they're the ones on ground, that will be able to know whether they are being clever by half. I mean, basically, if they are going to, if they are repairing it, is it local people that are doing it, or is it international people? If it is local people, when did the work start? Do they have a report? What's the diagram? I mean, they should show us some kind of progress report that is engineering in nature. That whatever they give you, you can check with the Nigerian Society of Engineers if this correlates with it. If it's international people that are doing it, as there was a contract given out to them, when did the contract start? There are we have to ask them more questions. And part of the reason why they also get lazy and they also don't act as quickly as they do is because when they say these things, nobody asks them further questions. And just like the Daily Trust and your TV carried the story of kidney harvest and all that, and all the whole nation is talking about it. If you ask further questions about these refineries, people will be on their toes and everybody else will be talking about it. So there is actually a responsibility for all of us, which includes the media and the man on the street, to ensure that everybody does their work. It is as simple as that. So for me, rather than, we can only guess if we don't have the facts.
But do we even need to guess? I mean, the government in general promised transparency. So why shouldn't there be, a map out for Nigerians to understand exactly what is going on in the energy sector? Okay,
so there is actually a map out. The only thing is that it isn't in the kind of details that we want. So there's an energy policy, there are statements by government. So there is, but the truth of the matter is that we need to probe. We need to understand that nobody, absolutely nobody, is going to give you enough information for you to be disturbing him or for him to be guilty. It is not in the nature of man. If I'm guilty in a case, it is not my place to give the judge or the prosecution evidence for me to be found guilty. That's not the way systems work. We are supposed to ask further questions. And truly, it is when you start to knock that they become innovative to solve it. Take, for example, the power sector. The power sector is a lot more complicated. But one of the reasons why the power sector has not collapsed is because every day people are knocking and they're asking questions, even when they don't fully understand. And so, if we ask further questions about the refinery, if we ask for evidence, it puts them under pressure to actually deliver. So we don't have to wait till that day. So we have to ask them, okay, 2 weeks into this announcement, are people on site? How much of the work has been repaired? We have a right to ask that. Is it 10%? Is it 20%? Okay, you say it's 5%. Can you give us evidence to this? Are there some documents that you can show us? Because by the time you ask this question, somebody will say, these people are looking for trouble. Because if they give you evidence, even if they are technical, there are organizations that exist for society. And I'll give an example, the Nigerian Society of Engineers, the Society for Petroleum Engineers, which I'm sure will be very happy to give you free technical analysis of whatever information has been provided. And based on that, you get more information and you probe them again. By the time you do that once or twice, somebody will sit down.
Indeed. At the end of the day, accountability, comes from the citizens, individuals, civil societies, and others. So, the question now to Nigerians is that what would you do in order to know where your taxpayers' money is going? And in terms of the refineries, of course, it's good to always push. So, go on, ask questions. That way we can get the right answers to know where we are headed. I mean, it's your money after all that it's been used to do this. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Olabode Sowumi, for joining us, energy analyst, also co-owner of an energy consultancy, Cabtree Limited, or Cabtree rather Limited, and publisher of Energia magazine, also a member of African Business Roundtable. Thank you so much for your time and your inputs, of course, on this topic.
Thank you. My pleasure.